Welcome to Better Than We Found It, the podcast for leaders driven to leave a positive mark through their leadership.
I hope that I will have created some ways in which the circumstances of your birth don't predict the opportunities you have in your life.
I'm Josh Huggins, your host and the founder of GS2 Partnership, a search firm committed to connecting visionaries dedicated to environmental and social betterment.
I have two young sons. I want to be able to tell them I did use the resources and expertise of a company to try to create more awareness about climate change.
In each episode, we delve into the minds of executive and future leaders. We discuss how sustainability guides responsible leadership, sparks change, and drives value.
The way of thinking I try and advocate is for us all to think about us having a collective problem to fix, which is climate, and that we need to rebuild our global economy.
We are GS2, and we are on a critical journey to connect to those who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Better Than We Found It. On today's show, we're joined by Ed Dixon, the Head of Sustainability for Private Markets at Aviva Investors. With a career spanning from the tools in construction and carpentry all the way through to leading sustainability within the private markets for one of the world's well-known financial institution, it's fair to say that Ed's journey has been one of real growth. We talk in the episode about how he's planned this methodically, thinking proactively about his career, and not just around the technical skills needed, but also, and I suppose more importantly, on the softer and leadership skills that he's developed, including going through an MBA program. We also talk about his vision for the future, what sustainability looks like within financial services, and some really practical career guidance and advice for those of you on this journey. So I hope that sounds interesting. I'm sure you're going to get a ton of useful information from it. So let's dive right in. So Ed, welcome to Better Than We Found It.
Thanks so much. Good to be here with you, Josh.
Excellent. Looking forward to the conversation. So I did give you a little intro before we started, but I'm sure I didn't do it justice. So would you mind, for the audience who perhaps don't know who you are, just giving a quick overview of yourself and your current role?
Of course, yeah. So I'm Edward Dixon. I'm Head of Sustainability for Aviva Investors. Aviva Investors is the asset management arm of the Aviva Group, FTSE 100 listed insurance company. And my role covers everything in the private markets in Aviva Investors. So we invest in everything from kind of very high risk venture capital all the way through to much lower risk, long dated real estate, private credit, and everything else in between. Really excited to be here and talk about my role with you today.
Brilliant. We're definitely going to get into what private markets is, because I know for some of the audience, they might not know, for those not in financial services. But if we take it all the way back, I think when we met and I heard your journey to where you are now, I thought it was a fascinating one and one that had to be shared with others. So I'd love to get into that. So tell me about where it started. You told me that you're on the tools. I think it was carpentry that you started in as a project manager, and taking all that leap to the financial services world is a huge step. So, could you start by telling me a bit about that original journey and perhaps what motivated you to go on it?
Yeah, sure. Well, so it's a long time ago now. I turned 40 this year, so it was 22 years ago, and I was originally supposed to go to university, and I kind of lost interest a little bit, so I pulled out. And on the day I was supposed to start uni, I turned up at the front door of a building site of a friend and knocked on the door and asked for a job. And they said yes and said, "You can start now." So I literally walked in and started, and worked in construction for about 7 years, from 2002 through till kind of 2008, 2009. And it was a lot of fun. And I learned a huge amount. Working on building sites really teaches you to negotiate, teaches you a lot of people skills. But it all came crashing down in the financial crisis in 2008, and I lost my job. I got made redundant. And I ended up selling TVs for a summer, just to kind of keep myself employed. And unemployed, 2008, not a fantastic position to be in. and needed something to do. And I got myself a place on a sponsored degree course, which was with a developer. And so this is the kind of like 5 years part-time kind of thing where they sponsor you through the course. And my first project that I got was this very beautiful sustainable building. And I got to see the project right from the start all the way through to completion. It was probably the most sustainable retail building ever built. It's a Marks and Spencer store up in Chester. And I saw the whole thing, you know, so I started on working on the deal on the land and working with the design team and working with the client. I moved up to Chester and I helped to build out the project, you know, getting on site at 7 a.m. and not leaving until 7, doing all the really granular stuff, you know, helping to manage the project. I even worked on some of it myself. I had my tool bag on site. And then I moved with the project over to the client side into Marks and Spencer and spent a year there on secondment. And from there, that really kind of grew my career in sustainability, because Marks and Spencer at the time were very much a big name in sustainability. You know, their Plan A strategy, which had been launched in 2007, was one of the most famous corporate sustainability strategies. And so I was really lucky to be a very small part of that. And from there, I kind of grew into sustainability consultancy. From there, I took on an executive MBA and moved into Landsec, formerly Land Securities. Fantastic business to be a part of. And when I finished my MBA, I then moved into financial services. So 22 years of work, and starting very, very close to the bottom and ending up somewhere near the top. It's been quite a journey.
For sure, and lots to unpack there. So the first thing to talk about is this decision to not go to university. So one, what were you planning to study, and two, when did you inform them that you were not attending your course?
So if I think back about this, you know, it's dreadfully irresponsible, right? Because I applied, I had a place, and I just didn't turn up. And I remember getting the letter to say, sort of, you know, you haven't turned up. What are you doing? And that's a really irresponsible thing for a teenager to do. And I think if I hadn't been in a position of being a white man, maybe I would have done things differently. But it was a pretty turbulent time for me, you know, and personally, and I think I just wanted to work, and just wanted to have money in my pocket, and just wanted to do something that was very productive. You know, I liked sort of getting on site in the morning and finishing the work and walking away at the end of the day and feeling like you'd really achieved something. Now, in retrospect, what I should have done is play the longer game and do the hard thing, right? And go to uni and have 3 years without money in your pocket. And that is a hard thing to do. And when I hear people of around that age saying similar things to what I said at the time around, well, I just want to work, I just want money, don't want to go uni because it's expensive, etc., I always now try to persuade them to say, look, do the hard thing, play the long game, and if you can go into higher education, then do it. It's not to say it's the only route, because there are other options available, but sometimes I do wish if I look back and I'd had a little bit more foresight at that age, then maybe I would have done things differently and taken my place and done the kind of more standard route into the industry.
And what was the degree?
It was marketing.
Okay.
I had no idea why I wanted to do marketing.
Yes.
It's probably a good idea that I didn't do it, and I think someone else would have got my place through clearing. So it's all's well that ends well, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And then, and so what drew you to construction?
Do you know, I think it was, it's kind of easy to get work in construction. You know, you need a kind of safety certificate, and then kind of on you go. You can start with relatively basic skills, and if you've got a bit of a work ethic and you don't mind rocking up every day, getting your hands a little bit dirty, literally or figuratively, then you can get on. And I think I got on quite quickly and progressed from kind of carpentry into project management and was delivering small projects. And construction for me is the very purest form of productivity. You know, if you get it right and you get the order of things right in the course of the day, a week, or a course of a project, you can really deliver stuff quite quickly and quite productively, and that's immensely satisfying. I do miss it sometimes, sitting in Aviva Investors. I'm very lucky for the role that I have. But sometimes when you get back to site and you're seeing projects come out of the ground or companies growing, you really get that kind of taste for it. So wouldn't write off going back.
Yeah, that would be full circle. So you mentioned this M&S build that you were on, and that being like the entry into the world of sustainability for you. So had you heard about sustainable construction or design prior to this, or could perhaps tell us about when your eyes kind of were opened to what this actually meant and the impact it could have?
Yeah, like I grew up in a real hippie town, so some people listening might know it. It's Hebden Bridge, and Hebden Bridge always shows up as those like top quirkiest towns to move to. It's one of those, and I think it was one of the first towns in the UK to ban the plastic bag. People listening will know the kind of a vibe. It's a little bit like Totnes in Devon and places like that. And so I always grew up around friends and friends' parents that were really into sustainability and were quite alternative people. And so I guess it's always been in me to an extent. But I suppose winding forward, the thing that drew me to sustainability in the built environment was that it was about doing things differently. And I've always been the sort of person that kind of sits in the room and does the, well, what about kind of questions, or, well, how about if we did this in another way, which is probably quite annoying, but it's really important for sustainability because construction and the built environment sector, it is a big juggernaut that is going in one direction, and that direction is growth within reason at all costs. And so sometimes as a sustainability professional, you have to be the sort of person that can stand up and say, actually, we could think a little bit more long term here and do this in another way. And so when I was presented with the project as an opportunity, I really kind of pushed to get myself into that project because it was such an incredible boundary breaking scheme that it was so blindingly obvious as the best opportunity for me at the time. What I would say though is that all the way through my career, generally line managers and leaders and people above me in the structure in companies have always given me a chance. And so if I look right at my first interview, right, for my role at Simon's Group, the developer that I moved to after I worked in construction on site, I remember that it was like a sort of speed dating style interview, right? And the HR business partner, a lady called Sue Bailey, she's probably not listening, but if you are, Sue, you kickstarted my career. Sue just saw something and took a chance on me. And the head of sustainability in Simon's Group, a lady called Rosie Fieldson, who's a lecturer at Lincoln University now, she saw something and took a chance. And I've been so lucky all the way through my career that when these big sustainability opportunities have opened up, someone in a senior role has seen something in me and has taken a chance on me. And I'm incredibly fortunate for that.
And I know we were going to get into it, but maybe it's a good time now. What do you think are those perhaps characteristics that you have that would lend people to come to that conclusion?
Do you know, I think, and this is a double-edged sword, right? Because I've always had a really strong work ethic, and I've always brought a lot of energy to work, and a lot of that has been energy for other people and to support and to serve and to guide other people. Now, lastly, in my career, that does come at a cost, because I think deep down I'm probably quite introverted. And so rocking up to work every day and trying to be everyone's favorite phone call, trying to be the fun person in the meeting that's coming up with interesting and different ideas, but also putting them across in a way that is meeting people in the middle rather than trying to be too directive. All that is quite emotional work. And so I think every tenet of your personality and your sort of professional persona, in this case, high energy, high ideas, strong work ethic, also comes at a cost. And it means that it runs your battery down super quickly, and you have to get to a position where you can kind of manage that as you get older. I've noticed, especially in the last couple of years after turning 40, that I have a lot less energy than I used to have. So it's one to watch for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me about the transition then. So you worked on the project with Simon's Group, and then you moved client side. So I suppose pretty early on in your career, you moved client side. What did that shift sort of teach you about the different perspective, I suppose, on sustainability, but also your ability to influence supply chain and perhaps setting you on the right path for your future career?
Yeah, I have so much to thank Marks and Spencers for, actually, and my line manager in the firm, a gentleman called Manish Datta, who is really closely involved with UK Green Building Council and Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. He's a very, very lovely man and very deeply experienced in corporate sustainability. But he taught me the power of being a really good client. And because M&S, their property team, their real estate team, at the time they had 1,000 stores all over the world, right? So he would be flying over to India, or he would be, popping over to Paris to see a new store launch over there. And he had to have that immediacy of communication with suppliers, with partners, with contractors on site. He had to be able to work with colleagues in the store delivery teams who would be working up against really tough timescales. He had to be able to very ably drop into, at one moment, an investment committee sitting around the table in quite a high stakes environment, to sitting in a meeting with the head of sustainability for the whole of St Marks and Spencer, with Jonathan Porritt sitting across the table, giving them a rinsing on their sustainability strategy and how it wasn't good enough. And so I think he taught me that you really need to take people with you. You need to be able to influence, you need to be able to play the long game, and to, as a client, know where you're trying to get to, accept that it's going to take an awful long time to get there, and be able to work and influence people to take them towards this much bigger goal. And as a consultant, and perhaps in construction, even on the consultant side, or on the kind of development management or construction management side, you see a much smaller slice of the picture. And as a client, it's just you, right? It stops with you. And if you don't have the big ideas and you can't take people with you over a long time frame, then you simply won't achieve anything. And so even in a short space of time, I only had 12 months at Marks and Spencer. They are an incredible client, real visionaries. And I'm so grateful for the experience that I picked up there.
Sure, understand. So then tell me about the journey thereafter. You said about moving into the consultancy world. Who was that with, and what was the role focused on?
Yeah, well, there's a little story in between, actually. I can't remember whether I told you when we caught up before, but I had a dream job working on the construction of Google's headquarters at King's Cross. And this was people will know it, it's the land scraper. It's like the height of the Shard, but kind of sitting on its side. It goes right the way from King's Cross Station all the way up to the big square next to Central St Martin's. Very beautiful building. It's glulam frame and incredible biodiversity. It's really, really next level. I worked on the first iteration of that back in 2012. And I thought I'd really landed this dream job, right? And we were working on site, lovely offices in King's Cross. The King's Cross area was really starting to come together, and we were working on this very special building. And at the time, the construction team had flown over to meet Google to present the plans. And as legend has it, I'm not sure what part of the story is really true, but Larry Page looked at the plans and decided that he wasn't particularly into it. Go back to the drawing board. And so the team flew home, and the vast majority of the team was effectively either let go or pushed onto other projects. And we kind of wrapped things up and everyone left. And so I was like, I'd got this incredible opportunity on a dream project, and it was immediately cancelled. And it took a good 2-3 years for that scheme to come back to planning and to be pushed through, and eventually it's being built out, and you can now see it being finished on the walk up to Central St Martin's from the station. So once again I was kind of floundering and needed to find something to do, and great opportunity came up with Mace in their consulting team. And I know Isabel McAllister, who's done one of your interviews, who was my former boss at Mace. She was another person, a senior person, that saw something in me and took a chance on me. And so I joined Mace and worked on data centers in Europe for Microsoft. I worked on 5 Broadgate, which is the huge office building out the back of Liverpool Street for British Land, and immediately got some really fantastic exposure into all different types of construction and lots of different types of clients in different jurisdictions. Really fast growing business. I mean, to experience just a couple of years of life at Mace, they were growing so rapidly, and the sustainability team there is something like 130 people, and when I was there it was maybe like 15. So great experience with Mace.
For sure. And what did that view? So you've been, I suppose, working for a contractor. You'd gone client side for a secondment, then going into consultancy. How did that different shift of perspective, or what was perhaps the biggest change in where you stood in the ecosystem when you were in the consulting environment?
Yeah, even within that short time frame, couple of years, I got really frustrated very quickly, because I could see that as a consultant, largely when you arrive on the project, a vast majority of the design decisions have already been made. And so I kind of had this nagging feeling in my mind that I needed to go one step further. And whilst the projects that I was working on were really exciting, I couldn't necessarily influence them to the degree that I wanted to. And so I started looking around and realized that in order to get into financial services, I was going to need the right qualifications. And so I started an executive MBA with what was then Cass Business School, now known as Bayes Business School, and used that to then make the jump into kind of client side, as it were, once again. And that turned out to be probably the best career decision I've ever made.
Just to pause there though, because I think that's the first time you've mentioned that financial services was the end goal. So why, even when you were at Mace, was financial services something that you wanted to do? And was it there, or was it before then that you had that realization?
I think it was in Mace that I realized that the people that hold the majority of the cards are the big developers, the businesses that finance them, and the companies that generally are really delivering at scale. And that made me realize that if I really wanted to influence things right the way from the start of the project, then I needed to work my way up. And I think I kind of looked at my CV at the time and thought, well, no one's going to really take me seriously. An ex-carpenter with a few years of experience from some good names for sure, but this wasn't a kind of premium CV. And I had a lot of help and support over the early stages of my career, which kind of said, look, you need to come with receipts, right? You need marks of approval, and you need stamps on your CV to say, yes, this is a kind of strong person with strong experience and strong skills. And so I knew that I needed to push it from that stage. And I started just making lists of all the biggest companies in real estate in the UK and just took it from there.
Sure, understood. So you said this next move was probably the pivotal one. So tell me about it. Landsec, obviously a well-known organisation, FTSE 100.
Yeah.
What was the role, and tell me a bit about that journey.
Yeah, so I made a list of all the biggest real estate investors in the UK, and names like British Land and Landsec came up, and then I started going through all their career websites and waiting for opportunities to come up. And a role came up with Landsec, who were building out their sustainability team. And there's a pattern here, right? Because again, senior woman, Caroline Hill, who most recently was head of sustainability for Europe for Blackstone, one of the most prestige roles in the industry, really. But she joined Landsec not long before me as their head of sustainability. And again, I think she saw my CV and maybe saw an angle there. And we went for a quick coffee around the corner from the Landsec offices at the Strand and went in for interviews. And again, she took a chance on me, and that was my kind of route into the big time. Landsec were then, and I think still are, respected as really the bellwether of the property industry, a real bastion. They've been in the sector since the Second World War. They have called every cycle in real estate right since then and continue to. They are phenomenally successful, have an incredibly strong brand and a very strong identity and culture. And so I was super, super lucky to get in there. If I hadn't have been white and male, would I have had every door opened to me? Certainly by many of the line managers that have kind of considered my CV along the way. But I make no bones about it. Getting into the real estate sector generally is harder for people that aren't of my particular demographic. And so I do recognize like how lucky I am and how that does open doors and make things easier for you. And so getting into Landsec was probably comparatively easy for me. I had an MBA on my CV by that point, and I think that really helped with an organization like that. And by the time I got there, it was really this was the period when sustainability was really growing, right? Sort of 2015, around that time. And I started working on sustainable design, and they'd just come to the end of a long period of development and were just getting back to thinking about their next development cycle. And so I got to redesign the sustainability brief, got to start working with architects and engineers on the design of lots of the new projects that they were working on at that time. And it's been so lovely over the last couple of years actually to see some of those schemes come to life. So places like Timber Yards in Southwark, which is a lovely kind of hybrid timber frame scheme. Places like Lewisham that just got planning permission. I worked in the very early stages of some of those projects all that time ago. And the role then quickly broadened out into a lot of the corporate reporting. And Caroline, who's an amazing leader, just kept on giving me chances, like pushing me and saying, okay, well, you think you could probably do that, so crack on with it. And then managing me to be able to make sure that I was actually delivering it well, and then setting me free to kind of crack on. And that's exactly the sort of leader that you want, guidance up until a point where you can stand on your own 2 feet, and then push you away and let you take some risks for yourself. And I worked on everything from kind of GRESB through to like investor relations and the annual report and all of our corporate sustainability disclosures. And that really gave me a kind of baptism of fire into the world of like data and reporting. Mm-hmm. And those years were still continue to pay dividends in my CV, because data, disclosures, annual reporting, regulation, that has become even more important since then than it was even more important now since it was then.
And what about the insight into investors and investor relations? Was that part? Did that become part of it? I suppose that's probably the closest synergy you will have had to it in the career to date.
Completely. And I was very lucky during my time in Landsec that I got to sit next to the investor relations team. And Landsec investor relations team are like the dons of the industry. They do it the best. They are absolutely so focused and in terms of managing the messaging and managing the relationship with the market. And I remember Rob Knoll, the CEO, always used to say, Monday to Friday is for shareholders and weekends are for family. Fantastic character who's now, I think, chairman of one of the big retail investors, retail property companies in the UK, Hammerson, but really visionary CEO. And I learned a huge amount about the relationship with the market just through what I overheard by sitting next to those guys. And they really brought us into the fold in terms of making sure that we were putting our best foot forward in terms of how we related to the market. And I remember going for meetings with, BlackRock, with their listed real estate investment team, where they were engaging us about topics that were important. And I started to sort of slowly understand that investors in real estate weren't just investors in real estate, they were investors in all sorts of other things. And I was doing my MBA at the time, and that gives you access to a lot of knowledge and a lot of peers in your MBA peer group, to help you to understand what a fund is, right? How investors fundraise, what equities are, what fixed income is, what the private markets are. And so I kind of realized that that's where I needed to end up, and started shortlisting companies and working out who the best companies were, and eventually shortlisted Aviva and Elgin as the best options for me, and was really lucky that a role came up at the time, and so I applied and eventually was successful.
So really interesting things to unpack in that. I think firstly, when did you realize that sustainability was more than a regulatory box tick for these investors, and actually something that could create value, and start to actually see the importance, I suppose, of your team in the overarching engagement with investors from Landsec's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, hearing the discussions with Landsec and the market, we were constantly gearing up for mid-year results or end-of-year results, and the way that they would cover, and I still listen into Landsec's annual results presentations because it's like theatre. They are real professionals, but they would have absolutely everything accounted for in terms of what might come up in Q&A, in terms of explaining their best projects that they were working on and that they were delivering, and sustainability would always be a core part of that messaging. And it was partly because they knew that their stakeholder groups were important. So good supply chain management, working with communities, these are essential things for a developer. But it was partly because they knew that it was important to their investors. ESG was already growing at that point in terms of importance, and the market would have expected a serious developer like Landsec to be across their environmental and social issues, and for the business to be run well and have strong governance. And so pressure from investors fed through into how the business responded, but was also a key part of how they responded to the market dynamics and to their stakeholders. And so as a business, it was really fundamental to what they did. But I also started to understand that for investors, it was becoming an opportunity. And so I think that's what started to pique my interest in finance. And I also, honestly, before I started my MBA, I didn't even really know what finance was. And so having that sort of collection of different exposures made me realize that there's this whole other section of the economy out there that could be a huge opportunity.
Sure. Thank you for that. Number two, when you were talking, that I thought that's crucial to highlight, is this proactive approach that you've taken at each of the steps of your career to think about the organizations you want to join, and how you've gone on that journey. A lot of people I talk to perhaps aren't as focused on that, and it can be quite reactive, to see what comes around and to apply at that point, or to have the conversation if a recruiter or headhunter gives them a call. But it seems to me that you've been very thoughtful constantly about where is next, and actually putting some time and attention into the organizations you'd want to work for. Where do you think that came from, number one? And two, perhaps could you just explain a bit about that for people that might be at crossroads, or where they're thinking about what's next, and just how you go about that shortlisting process?
Yeah, sure. I guess from the start, I started out in a not particularly well-paid job and worked in that for a while. And whilst my friends were at uni, I always earned more than them and had money in my pocket for the weekends, and that felt good. But then as soon as they finished their degrees, they got graduate jobs in pensions or went into research or whatever, and suddenly people's earnings started creeping up. And then by 2008, by the point that I got made redundant in the crash, I was really behind. And so at the start, it was always about money and about following the money and working out where were people the best paid and where did people have the most power and influence, and follow that. And the way to get there, that I later learned through MBA, the careers team at Bayes Business School, absolutely phenomenal bunch of people that taught me a huge amount. And the skill of it is in lists, right? And LinkedIn really helps for this, because you can work out lots of very easy ways of shortlisting the best companies in the best sectors that are located in the right places. But I know it sounds so simple, but making lists, right? Who are the top developers? Who are the top financial services companies in the UK, if that's where you want to work? Who are the top contractors, the top, etc. Making lists and then going from longer lists to shorter lists, and shorter lists to actual tangible opportunities in the market is your friend. And so I was always quite good at doing that, but I think early in my career it always came from a negative place, because actually it was about catching up with friends, not feeling like I was behind. It was about needing to earn money, because I actually tangibly needed to earn money because I was really badly paid. And it was only later in my career that it became much more about trying to find the spheres of influence where you could really kind of change things from a sustainability perspective. And so sort of 2014, 2015, and when I was applying and trying to get into Landsec, I was realizing that it's only the top developers and investors and managers of property that really hold the cards. And from there, I then realized that actually it's financial services that really, really hold the cards. Now, for some other people, this might look a little bit different. So if you're listening and thinking, well, actually, it's really government or local authorities, or perhaps it's the biggest businesses that hold most of the cards. That is true, right, to an extent, and it depends what sort of influence you're after. You might also be thinking that it's actually third sector that hold a lot of the influence, because they hold the private sector's feet to the fire, or the government's feet to the fire, and help to push things forward and create change in the world. So all of these things are true, right? And whatever your particular preferred route might be, there will be a group of people and a group of organizations somewhere which hold a lot of the cards and hold a lot of the influence. And for me, particularly for sustainability careers, that's where you're trying to get to in order to be able to enact the biggest change. You know, you've only got from 9 to 5, or if you're working longer days from 8 till 6 or whatever, that's the only time that you've got available in order to create influence in the world. And so for me, you need to get into the sorts of organizations that have the most influence, because time is finite, right?
Sure, but I suppose it's the long listing, the short listing. I mean, it sounds like you could be a good recruiter, to be honest, with the way that you put that together. But that's what we do. You know, when we find an individual who we think could be great for a particular demographic or niche, that's what we do. We build out the lists of organisations that could be interested and bring that. But you taking that into your own hands has clearly been extremely successful for you, and I don't see many people, and I think this is what naturally brought us together. I don't see many people going from purely on the tools through to such a prestigious role within an investment firm that you have, which must, that proactive process must have played a big part in you getting to the end goal that you really wanted to. So I think there's a lesson there for people to learn. And then the third thing that you mentioned, which have to pick up on, is the MBA. It seems like, of course, that's been a pivotal part of accelerating the transition for you into financial services. Perhaps you could talk a bit about how going through that process, it changed your viewpoint from maybe more of the technical specialism of sustainability and environmental management into something that was much more of a leadership role within an organization that just, I suppose, happens to have the focus on sustainability amongst other things. So could you tell me a bit about that experience and what it's done for you?
Yeah, so the careers team at Bays always used to tell me that they're trying to develop graduates with T-shaped skills, right? So you want knowledge that's incredibly broad but coupled with a specialism. And so I guess I was kind of coming to MBA with a specialism, which was sustainable design and construction and development, but I needed to develop the breadth. And when I first started getting into the application process for MBA, what I thought it was going to give me was knowledge of finance and corporate accounting and some of these more kind of technical factors, statistics, whatever. It did give me that, absolutely. But actually, far more specifically, what the MBA gave me was knowledge of organizational behavior, leadership skills, influencing, negotiating, how to present yourself in a room, much more of what people would probably call soft skills. Now, people might not know this, but interesting fact, the reason why soft skills are called soft skills is because in the 1950s, the US Army had two types of training. They had hard skills, which was like tanks, machine guns, rocket launchers or whatever, right? Hard skills. And they had soft skills, which was things without the tanks and without the machine guns, right? And forevermore since then it's been called soft skills. But actually what they never meant was that they're soft skills as in less important, more fluffy. They just meant that they don't have guns, right? So soft skills are actually probably the most important thing. And it's also about career trajectory, because in the early part of your career, you may be head down, contributing to a deal, contributing to some piece of strategy work, or contributing to some piece of underwriting or analysis or whatever. And it's about output, right? And it's about the technical quality of your output. You then cross a little bit of a bridge, or most people do, between 28, 30, could be 35, where you go from just being an individual contributor, delivering something tangible and hard, which you're probably doing on your own, to being someone that needs to work as part of a broader leadership team, to being someone that needs to balance their own priorities with the priorities of everyone else, someone that needs to be able to lead other people, or be led by other people, sometimes in precarious different directions and depending on what's going on with the business. And the set of skills that you need for that by the time you get to your mid-30s in a typical career are very, very different. And so the thing that MBA gives you is that kind of transition from being very deep to having, they call it knowledge an inch deep and a mile wide, right? So you get the breadth, you get the knowledge of the other functions in a business, and you learn to work with other people. And it really takes a little bit of an edge off your ego as well. You get thrown in MBAs into a group of 5 or 6 people. You've got to get together, work effectively over a very short time frame to crunch out a piece of work which needs high marks, and there's no space for ego in that.
For sure, absolutely. And I think it's something that we see a lot of in the career journey, is people who have had a huge amount of success early on. They've been praised highly, they've been promoted based upon being an individual contributor or being a technical specialist, and they come to us looking for a leadership role or wanting to take that step up, and the default conversation can sometimes be, what course do I need to take, but with a very much a bias towards another technical area of focus, and we're constantly having to encourage individuals to look at things outside, perhaps even of sustainability, but broader leadership, and I think sometimes that's not always signpost the best, unless somebody's gone to do an MBA. Do they get the advice and the guidance to do so? So I think that's really useful to talk to people about. So we've gone for 40 minutes and we've not spoken about Aviva, so I think it's time now to move on. So for those not within financial services, firstly, could you just explain what you mean when you say Aviva Investors private markets? I think it's important to know what you mean by private markets for those who don't quite understand that.
Yeah, sure. I guess if we took a brief tour of finance, then we could start with asset owners, right? And asset owners could be me or you or lots of the people listening. So if you have an insurance policy, or if you have a pension, which most people have through their workplace, or you could even have a private pension, or you might have a stocks and shares portfolio through like Hargreaves or Nutmeg or something like that. If you have any of those things, then you're an asset owner, right? And that money needs to be managed, because if you just stick it under your bed, or if you stick it in a bank account, then it won't be worth quite as much in a few years' time when you go back to get it for whatever else you might need it for. And so asset owners will aggregate up pools of capital and give it to people like us, asset managers, intermediaries, for that money to be managed. Don't get me wrong, some of that is done through banking. So if you stick your money in a savings account, then a bank is going to go away and take that money and invest it to make sure that it's there when you come back and that it's worth the same amount, or ideally a little bit more. So as an asset manager, we're really an intermediary. We're managing capital on behalf of asset owners. and investing that money into the market to lock it away and to deliver returns back to asset owners, so that money is useful when it needs to be. And that could be anything from like insurance policies, right? So life insurance, people die, need to pay out premiums, okay? So that money needs to be invested so that it's there for the long term. Your pensions, they need to grow over a very long period of time. And when you retire, that could be 40 years later or 50 years later after you started your career. You need your money to really grow so that it's going to support you for the rest of your life. Or it could just be that you've saved up and you put your hard-earned savings into a wealth account, and you want to manage a portfolio so that you have a house deposit or something like that, right? And so we're managing money for asset owners, and we're then delivering that into the market. And that is done in lots of different ways. It could be done through investing in equities, listed companies. It could be done through investing in what we call fixed income or bonds, right, where that's just listed companies or countries that are making debt available for investment. But for the private markets, what we're really talking about is the things that aren't listed, right? So it's everything that's not publicly traded. So in the private markets, what we're talking about is investing directly in real estate, directly into buildings. We're talking about investing directly into infrastructure, wind farms, road, rail. Or we could be talking about investing by lending to private companies. So off-market lending, we might call it. Or it could be actually buying companies and then growing them over the time. And the private markets are fundamentally different because you're locking your money away for a much longer period of time. So we tend to be dealing with what we call professional investors or institutional investors, people that are dealing with very large sums. They're locking away their money for a long period of time and they're comfortable with that. And they're seeking to get some diversification through investing in the private markets. So you can invest in the stock market, you can invest in bonds, but actually over time, one of the things that you also need to do as a professional investor is invest in things that are very long dated, that will continue delivering cash flows or to continue growing that investment over time, so that over these very long time frames that we deal with in terms of pensions or insurance, the money is going to be keeping growing.
Sure. So when I talk to people who are in financial services or some that are not, there seems to be a bit more of a focus from a sustainability perspective anyway on private markets because people feel as though they can perhaps have more impact. Could you explain a bit about why that is and maybe some examples in what you do within Aviva Investors?
Yeah, so investing in equities and listed companies and listed debt, you can absolutely have really positive impact by not only selecting the best companies, but also by engaging with them. And my colleagues in the liquid markets or the kind of listed space in Aviva Investors do some incredible things. In the private markets, it's much more direct. And so you have a high level of responsibility in terms of how you deploy that money and how you deal with your counterparties. It could be companies that you're buying, it could be assets that you're buying into and then managing. You have a really high level of responsibility, but you also have this amazing opportunity to create change. And so if we invest in a building, then that's our decision as to how we design and how we develop or refurbish that building or how we manage it over time. And if it works for the client and it works for the market, you can do some absolutely amazing things. And it's the same with growing private companies. You know, as a private markets investor, you have the opportunity to invest in a small and growing health tech business or a small and growing infrastructure business that is investing in battery storage. And then you have the chance to scale that company over time and also help them to become a more responsible business as they grow. And it's very immediate and very tangible. You know, you might be dealing with a business one day by supporting them with their sustainability reporting, but the next day you might be dealing with an architect to support them with sustainable design and really pushing the boundaries in terms of what's possible for one of the assets in your portfolio. So it's very immediate, it's very tangible, it's very hands-on, and with that comes this great opportunity to create change.
Sure. And I suppose back to that piece around the kind of technical versus leadership. when you are in private markets or within financial services, obviously there is a balance. You have to understand the technical side because that's important, but also you have to overlay that with business acumen because of the types of individuals you're dealing with who are very commercially minded, maybe aren't from a sustainability background and are purely looking at returns. What do you think are one or two key skills that you've developed to allow or enable you to work at that intersection effectively and to be successful in your role?
Do you know, I think it all comes down to people skills, because the way that I used to be much earlier on in my career was much more belligerent, right? We're going to do it like this, and I would just effectively push and force people and throw my toys out of the pram if it didn't go right. But actually, when you get further along in your career, you realize that everyone in an organization just has slightly different pressures and slightly different challenges. And so if you're getting pushback from someone, and this happens all the time as a sustainability professional, okay, I want to do this design of this building like this, I want to invest in this company in this way because I think it's more sustainable, etc. We all kind of have that in us as sustainability professionals. The person on the other end of the phone, or the person sitting across on the desk from you, they've got slightly different pressures, right? It might be about reducing risk. It might be about making sure that they hit a deadline in terms of a project being completed. It might be about delivering a certain level of returns. And so you just need to work with that person to understand their perspective and understand what they need and why they might not want to immediately jump on board with your fantastic sustainability idea, and work with them to try and find that happy middle ground and plot a route forward. And I think it's about taking time to understand and respect people, taking the time to really understand their asset class or their perspective or their expertise, and learning the opportunity to be able to work with them and kind of see them where they are and design something that can work for them. So much of the time in sustainability, and especially in sustainable finance, there are so many win-wins. If we just think about the sustainable lending program in Aviva Investors over the last few years, we've managed to integrate sustainability into so many of our loans just because it's good for business. Sustainable design, we've got some fantastic buildings in our portfolio in the UK, in Europe, that we've been bringing forward. And actually, that's just because the design has been optimized to meet whatever the market wants. And we're just producing good buildings, and that's not about shoving regulation onto someone's plate. It's not about just giving them a brief and then telling them to crack on with it. It's about this kind of co-generation of ideas and working with this idea of, okay, let's make money for clients, let's deliver something that's going to work in the market, but let's also deliver something that is forward thinking and is going to make the market and be innovative and actually provide something new and different, because that's probably going to be good for returns and probably going to be good for your colleague that maybe didn't like your idea in the first place,
Sure, yeah. And I suppose then it comes back to that leadership piece, not so much from an individual perspective, although it starts with individuals, but as an organisation or even as a sector to drive this systemic change that is needed to, I suppose, combat climate change crisis and the associated areas of biodiversity loss and other areas. So what do you think the role is of asset managers in addressing these issues, and how do you take that position in Aviva Investors?
Asset managers have this huge weight of responsibility, but it is a well remunerated sector in terms of how companies are paid and how individuals are paid. So that's proportionate, I think. And I think the secret to all of this is really just thinking long term. Because if we think short term about, how can we deploy money into the market quickly for clients? How can we design a scheme or, work with a company to deliver profits that are as high as they possibly can be year one? It's not a particularly thoughtful way of going about doing business. I think multi-year planning and trying to understand the trends is a far better way of kind of conducting yourself as an asset manager. And I think a lot of asset managers are very good at doing that. Aviva Investors, I'm very fortunate, is definitely one of those. And so I think always coming back to what's the best thing to do short term here. Usually, in many cases, that will be something that is at the expense of increased success long term, at the expense of creating more pollution, at the expense of upsetting stakeholders, at the expense of risk in many cases. What's the better thing to do for the long term in terms of for the client, for stakeholders, for the project, and how can we inject a little bit more thought and care into this company or this particular scheme, because that will usually give you a much better answer. And so I think the onus is on asset managers is to think long term. And there have been several quite sad examples from financial services and asset management over the years of where some companies, and I won't mention any names, but there have been various scandals and crises in the press in years gone by, where I don't think that's happened. And I think short-term profit making has gone at the expense of what's best for clients and the asset owners, which could be you or me if we have a pension, and at the expense of the society that those asset owners ultimately exist in and will certainly retire into later down the line.
There's been a lot of, I suppose, kind of pushback and challenge, even from some mainstream media. I think the FT, there was an article about ESG investing being dead not that long ago. And, you hear these headlines that are, I suppose, putting sustainability focused investing at the expense of financial returns. How does that narrative change? What are you doing to try to change that? And what's your view from being in the industry as to what that actually looks like in practice?
Yeah, it's such a current topic, right? And there's so much academic literature that's coming out now that is polarized. Some of it, ESG is a sure thing. Some of it, it's not correlated to returns, etc. And it's so interesting to see how the debate is evolving. I think around 2019, 2020, we were in the world of ESG will save the world. ESG will make us all money. It's going to deliver outperformance. And I think very quickly, in the last few years, we've actually got to the point where the debate is much more nuanced. Sustainable investing, and by that I would mean picking a specific set of assets to invest in which are more sustainable than not. So it could be, okay, I'm going to go and invest in renewables, or I'm going to go and invest in only sustainable companies measured by this benchmark or these metrics or whatever. Or I'm only going to invest in very deep green real estate. Pick your fancy, any form of sustainable investing. It comes at a trade-off, right? Because any form of investing that you choose over another, short of just investing in the S&P 500 or the FTSE 100 or a very diversified kind of group of assets, it always comes at a cost. Right, and that cost is an opportunity cost because you could have invested in something else. So you might be taking a little bit more risk. You might be locking up your money for a little bit longer. You might get a greater dispersion of outcomes in terms of, well, this set of stocks is performing well, or this set of assets is performing well, and this one not so much, because picking any style of investing in the market always has a trade-off. I could say that I am only going to invest over the next couple of years in the oil and gas sector. Right, that might come with incredibly high risks because some of those companies might suffer from transition risks over time. Or I could say I'm only going to invest in restaurants, right, or whatever. If the restaurant sector happens to go through COVID, it's going to take a big hit, and then you're going to have a hit to performance, right? And so any form of selecting you're picking your poison and selecting a particular type of assets to invest in is always going to result in a different set of outcomes to just investing on a diversified basis. And so people just need to accept that and to work with it and to recognize what the trade-offs are, and to make sure that clients and asset owners are aware of those and they're aware of the risks, and that you're constructing something that meets the investment horizons and the risk return parameters that they're trying to create. And that's not a reason not to invest sustainably, because actually there's lots and lots of different types of capital and asset owners out there in the market that absolutely do want to lock their money away for 30 years in a big infrastructure project, or are quite happy to take a lot more risk in investing in refurbishing an old building over a 5-year period, because they know that taking that risk is going to leave them with bigger rewards at the end of the period. So I think it's just about constructing the right thing for the right investor, and if you can do that, you can create all sorts of incredible opportunities for sustainability.
For sure, but I think it's also one thing that when I hear that it's about the narrative, to paint the picture of what the future can look like, and being able to articulate that well to the right audience with the right message, and not taking a blanket approach to that, which I think comes back to those softer skills that you were talking about at the beginning. We could go on about that for a very long time, I'm sure, but I'm mindful of getting through everything I want to. I suppose lastly then, in terms of you and your career, you're on a great journey. I know we've spoken about kind of broader ambitions, perhaps within Aviva, and stepping up into more senior roles. How do you envisage your next step being, not from just what the role is, but I suppose moving to the executive level and having broader conversations and embedding sustainability within that? How do you see that playing out perhaps in your career in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, as I stand at the moment, I'm one down from the executive committee, and for this is sort of corporate jargon, if you will, but typically in most organisations you'll have the CEO, and then under that you'll have the CEO's leadership team, which is in many cases called the executive committee, or execcom as we might call it. Your career up until you get onto an executive committee, I think, goes at one speed, and day to day will feel a certain way. Making that jump into executive committee, which I've seen for my boss, incredible leader, there's a real change, right? And heavy lies the crown. So absolutely, that is my aspiration, and I do want to get into a more senior leadership role over time. But let's not also forget that the role that I have, which is comparatively definitely easier to being on an executive committee, where you're part of a very tight leadership team that takes a huge amount of responsibility and has to think very long term. My role is comparatively easy in compared to that, and so I have an incredible team. There's sort of 11 of us in private markets and Aviva Investors. We have some incredible things to look forward to in the years ahead. So we have just launched in the last couple of months a carbon removals fund, working on nature-based solutions and engineered carbon removals. We have been working on a venture capital capability that's investing in a really broad variety of sectors, from kind of healthcare through to innovative materials. We have launched recently a multi-sector private debt fund that is going to be investing in all sorts of private credit and infrastructure across Europe. And we have our existing books of business in terms of private credit and lending, real estate, and an incredible growing infrastructure business, which is investing in clean tech. And so, the sky's the limit there, right, in terms of what we can achieve in the next few years. And I think it's certainly in me, and for many people listening, I think you'll have this too, because of the nature of this podcast. But there is always going to be, particularly for people in sustainability and for people that want to push themselves and want to grow, there is always going to be that desire to push and to push and to push. What's next? What's next? What's next? And actually, in many cases, the question you should ask yourself first is, well, what could I actually improve around me and for my own role? And how could I redesign that and work with that? And I went through a bit of a kind of career crisis last year, where I was thinking, God, been here for a while now, what's next kind of thing? And, what should I be focusing on and where should I be going? And I had some fantastic advice from someone called Michael Hall at CPPIB, who, managing director in a very prestigious company. And he said, look, you need to reinvent your own role where you are first, and that can be incredibly rewarding. And so I did that, and I've refocused the team. I've managed to take some of the things that the team that were doing that ideally should have been done somewhere else and move those. I've managed to get the team much more focused on investing and on research and the front end and all of the kind of slightly more exciting end of stuff, and move some of the more kind of operational stuff into other parts of the business. And that is absolutely the approach that we should all take, is to say, well, if I have career aspirations to grow and if I have my eyes on the next step, how could I actually just change the role that I have into that next step before looking elsewhere? And it's been really rewarding for me to do that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and follows a pattern of a conversation that we have a lot with people looking to get just into sustainability, not in sustainability roles. And it's, I'm trying to get into a sustainability role. I want to have more impact. And again, the question is, well, how can you kind of re-engineer your current role to have more impact? And I'm sure there's areas in the business that they're doing things that you could, even if it's side of desk or voluntary in your own time, staying a little bit longer at the end of the day to get that part done, that can add value in your organization, that might create an opportunity internally, might raise your profile externally, but taking accountability and looking inwards rather than always, I suppose, not demanding or maybe expecting something to come to you. You've got to go out there and get it. So I think that's really, really good advice. A few quick fire questions then before we finish. Who inspires you the most in the sustainability world?
That's a tricky one. I would say it's people in positions of real responsibility in some of the really big private markets investors. And so if you look at any of the huge, very long-term sort of Canadian model of pension funds, perhaps some of the Aussie superannuation schemes, perhaps some of the big sovereign wealth firms, those are huge and very complex roles. And those individuals are playing the kind of the field between looking at a huge portfolio and transitioning it over time, but then also having that weight of being such an important player in the market that they're needing to work quite closely in hand with government. And so, yeah, I think, pick any of the big Canadian model pension funds, and people in the most senior roles there probably have the most inspiring and some of the most influential positions in the whole of sustainability, never mind just financial services in the private markets.
Sure. You're giving a lot of advice out today from what you've done in your own career, but if there was one piece of career advice you could give to someone who was starting in sustainability today, what would it be?
So people say a lot that if you find your passion and you follow it, that the money will come in time. That is categorically the worst piece of advice that anyone could ever give you. Okay? What career success is about, and this is, if people don't read Cal Newport, then read Cal Newport. Really good selection of different books and insights that he provides through his podcast. But what he explains in his book is that cultivating rare skills that are in short supply is the thing that is going to bring career success. Now, in sustainability, as a sustainability professional or someone that is starting to get into that, you're already starting to cultivate quite rare skills, because there aren't that many people that have them in comparison to people that have financial modeling skills or whatever. Now, the point is to try to orient those skills towards where the market is going, and that will bring with it career opportunities and financial success. Having a passion in sustainability obviously helps, but for me, passions are something like, it might be tennis, right, or whatever you're into outside of work. Inside work, you need to be thinking about, where's the market going, what skills are going to be in short supply, how can I develop those skills through experience, through training, through qualifications, through broader learning, through my network, and then how can I position myself in the places where those skills are going to be paying the most and in the most short supply, because that is what will bring career success.
Thank you. And then lastly, and you touched on a couple that of what you're doing right now that might be one of these, but what's the one sustainability innovation in private markets that you're most passionate or excited about?
It's two things for me. One is carbon removals and the other is venture. Because what I've learned overseeing a huge portfolio of loans, we have 3,000 loans in our back book of lending. We have 300 buildings across the UK and Europe that we're managing. It is very hard to decarbonize and to really create change across an existing book of loans and assets. Doesn't mean that we're not doing it, because we absolutely are, and that's the lion's share of our work. But trying to create change across those existing assets is one part of the story. perhaps the most exciting and more important part of the story is diverting capital towards those businesses and solutions that are really solving the problem. And in venture capital, you're starting to see climate tech businesses grow and get through seed stage into the stage where they're desperate for capital and they need to scale up fast, and they're perhaps investing in recycling technology, or they're investing in particular types of, energy generation from wave power or whatever else it is. Those businesses are capital hungry and they need to grow. And so the sorts of businesses that we've started to invest in through venture and through infrastructure equity are squarely in that opportunity of capital hungry businesses that need to scale. And those will be the mega companies of tomorrow, the Teslas and the Orsteds that are providing huge scale solutions to climate. Carbon removals is the same. This is an asset class that is absolutely in its infancy. And both from a kind of nature perspective in terms of creating nature projects that will draw down emissions from the atmosphere, or in terms of engineered removals that might be actually like really sucking emissions out of the atmosphere through machinery and equipment. These are tomorrow's technologies. And if we're not focused on selecting those, supporting them, working hand in hand with government, diverting capital, which is tricky because they're higher risk and you run a much higher risk of losing your money, then we're missing out on opportunities and we're failing to support the things that need to grow to solve the problems that we have today. So that's where I think the biggest opportunity is for me, kind of career-wise, and something that I definitely encourage others to think about too.
Thank you. Yeah, certainly good advice to check out those industries as well from a skill set perspective that might be in high demand in the future. So thank you for that. So Ed, the podcast is called Better Than We Found It, and part of the career journey, I suppose, is to think about the end and reverse engineer it. So by the end of your career, what is it that you would like your legacy to be, to know internally or to show externally that you've left the world better than you found it?
I think the cross-cutting theme across my career since I started in sustainability in 2009 was always about changing people's minds. And at the start of my career, that was always maybe from a little bit more of a sort of playful, slightly kind of disruptive perspective of, it was more about the sport of it at the time of, could I change people's minds? And that would be quite rewarding if I could. Later in my career, it's become much more about seeing people achieve for themselves through sustainability. And so if I can work with an investment manager or an originator who's going out there and sourcing deals, or if I can work with a fund manager or a senior leader in the organization, and I can see them have that penny drop moment where they realize, okay, this is kind of just about thinking long term. And actually we can come up with something more innovative here that would create a great sustainability outcome that would also be good for the client. Then they go and do it for themselves. And so I'd love to be remembered as someone that served when they show up to work and was there for other people and encouraged and facilitated and created an environment where people could achieve for themselves through thinking sustainably.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's an ambition that I'm sure you will fulfill, and look forward to seeing that journey. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for sharing so much wisdom and your story. I'm sure it's going to inspire others to take action themselves. If people have listened and they're fascinated or inspired to reach out and have a conversation with you, or perhaps just ask for your advice, would you be happy to do so? And if so, where would be a good place for them to reach you?
Yeah, 100%. LinkedIn, you can just request me and I'll get back in touch. The reason why is because earlier in my career, I needed to rely on those open doors in order to make progress. And I was so fortunate that, from kind of 2009, people perhaps who listened to podcasts like yours at the time did respond and did say yes and did open doors when I reached out. And so I have absolutely an obligation to pay that back, because I owe a lot of my career success to the people that helped me along the way.
Brilliant. Well, we'll have to stay tuned to that, because I think, as we were discussing, there's a program or a scheme that we're looking to put together to help and facilitate people in their career that I'm sure you'd love to be a part of, and that listeners would as well. So stay tuned for that. But look, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing how it continues for you into 2025, and maybe we'll get you back on in the future to hear how it's all going.
Thanks so much, Josh. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Better Than We Found It. I hope you have found value from this to support your own purpose-led journey. This episode was brought to you by GS2 Partnership, my organisation focused on providing talent solutions for sustainably focused organisations. We are driven by our purpose of connecting the people who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. If you are looking for a partner to support you with your hiring plans, or you are looking for your own career next steps, please reach out to us or personally drop me a message on LinkedIn. It's great to hear from listeners to the podcast, and I would welcome the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for our next episode.